Hi guys, it's Ben here. I just wanted to go through some of the supplies you're going to be using for your drawing class this semester. Um, I've found that, for a lot of you guys, it's probably your first time taking an art class, so it might be your first time using some of these materials. And if you go into an art supply store with just the list to look at and you don't know what you're looking for, it can be really overwhelming. And the same goes for shopping online even. It can be really, there's so many options out there that it can kind of quickly overwhelm you if you don't know what you're looking for. So we're doing this video today to kind of look through the different supplies you're going to be using. I'll point out some things to look for with each one and talk a little bit about how we use some of them. Hopefully I won't be too long-winded, but we'll see. And at the end of the video, I'll also talk about some supplies that aren't necessarily on the list, but are things that I'd recommend having, either for doing more drawing in the future or just kind of little things to make life easier in the studio. So that being said, let's go ahead and get down to it. I've got your supply list pulled up on my screen so I can kind of look through it here as I talk. So I'll make sure that I cover everything in the order that it's listed on the supply list. So the first thing that we have is a drawing pad. This will be where you do most of your main projects on this 18 by 24 inch drawing pad. So you can see that's a pretty substantial size, which again can be a little intimidating at first if you haven't done much, but I found that it's a really comfortable size to work with. So, there's a lot of brands you could check out. This is Canson, you can see right here. But the one thing you really want to look for is the drawing weight, or the weight of the paper, I should say. So you'll notice down here in the corner how it says 90 pounds. That refers to the thickness of the paper and kind of the texture that we have. So when you have something that's 80 or 90 pound, which is what I recommend, it's a little thicker, it's a little heavier weight. Can't really tell much just looking here, but it's got kind of a nicer quality to it. So if you're doing a lot more shading and erasing and things like that, it'll hold up better over time versus some of the thinner papers out there. They don't always let you do quite as much with charcoal. And we'll do a lot of drawing with charcoal this semester. And then white, bright white, off-white, any kind of white is totally fine with me. Now, the next main type of paper you're going to have is your sketchbook. I'm recommending 11 by 14, which is a little bit bigger than this one, but sketchbooks, one nice thing about them is you can find them a lot of different places for pretty cheap overall. So, this is a real cheap one I got like at Walmart a few years ago, and it's thinner paper than your main drawing, but you can see it's just bright white paper. You don't want anything with lines in it. You don't want anything that's got kind of a weird tone to it, just something white and smooth, and that should be fine. Now, next we're going to look at your actual drawing utensils that you're going to use this semester. So the first thing we have listed are pencils. Woodless graphite pencils are what I recommend because they're a little easier to work with. They're a little nicer. They don't snap quite as easily as the more traditional drawing pencils. But if all you can get a hold of are just standard drawing pencils, that's fine too. The thing we want to avoid, we don't want any mechanical pencils. The problem with these is, like with this really thin lead tip, you can't get a variety of line work going on with your drawing. So you're really kind of constricted with how you can make marks with these. And honestly, there end up being a lot more problems with trying to use a mechanical pencil than to use more traditional drawing materials. So instead, we want to look for what are called drawing pencils. And these come in a variety of weights or thicknesses. So you'll notice on the supply list, it mentions 8B, 6B, 4B, 2B, and HB. These are all referred to the type of lead or that is in the pencil. So when we look at, like, this is a more traditional drawing pencil by Prismacolor, and you'll see at the very end here, I don't know how well we can see that. There's a 6B right there. Let me see, I have a better pencil in here somewhere that I can show you. But the bottom line is like we want to have a pencil that has, there, this one's better. So when you look at this one, you can see how it says 5B right there. And that refers to the type of lead that is in the pencil. Typically, like a variety of options is good because you'll find that some will work better for larger areas, some will work better for tiny details, some will erase better than others. So getting a nice range will help you see how you can use them in different situations and make your drawings a lot more interesting and engaging overall. Now, before I go too far, one other thing I want to mention is it's good to have a place to keep all your supplies. I've found, like, even if you work at home, you know, we all have that problem of like setting something down in one room and leaving, and then the next day not being able to figure out where in the world you put it because it's not with all your other stuff. So if you have like some type of container to keep all your supplies together with, that really makes your life a lot easier, and it'll make you more productive when you're working through your drawings. Anyway, other drawing utensils. The next section we're going to talk about are charcoal. We do a lot of drawings with charcoal. I think it's a much more rewarding material to use because it gives you a lot of freedom, and you can get this really nice range of really soft, subtle, lighter tones, as well as really dark, rich, deep values. So I think having a couple different types of charcoal helps give you a lot of flexibility. So the first type, the main type we want to look at, is compressed charcoal. These come in these little sticks, so they look kind of like little rectangular prisms here, you know. So this is one type. It's been used a little bit, so you can see how it's wearing down a little bit. But you're going to want a pack of like 5 or 6 or so. So, you know, like this is the brand I've been using lately. It's the Dick Blick kind of student grade charcoal, and it comes in a set of 12, so it can last you a pretty good amount of time. This is another one where you see a lot of different brands out there. They're all going to have slightly different properties to them too. Like different brands of charcoal will have different textures. So it can be good to experiment with other stuff. If you get one kind and don't like it, try a different brand next time. But I like the kinds that tend to be a little softer and a little less waxy. Now, the other types of charcoal we're going to look at primarily is vine charcoal. So vine charcoal comes in these kind of little thin wispy things, and they come in different sizes. So here I've got 3 different sizes. This is all vine charcoal, and you'll notice a lot of times vine charcoal looks like if you snapped a twig off a tree and then burnt it up in a fire. This is really what it looks like. It's got this kind of curving quality to it a lot of times. It's never perfectly straight, and it's really, really lightweight. Vine charcoal is not going to get as dark and black as compressed charcoal, but it's a really good tool for sketching. It's really good for gesturing. Almost all of my drawings I start off with vine charcoal before I get into any heavier stuff. And a lot of paintings too, I do some sketching with vine charcoal. So I think it's a really good tool to have. Now vine charcoal also you can find in these kind of thicker jumbo round sticks here. So I'd recommend getting 1 or 2 of these as well, because you'll see you can do a lot of different things with them when they come in those different formats. I'm already getting totally filthy just from touching a few things. Now the last type of charcoal we're looking at are charcoal pencils. So we have, these might come in, you know, something like this. They might be black or different colors, but the bottom line is it looks like a normal wooden pencil, but on the interior there it has charcoal instead of graphite. And again, these come in different weights. So like you can see these two, when I hold them up, you can see that top one says 4B soft, that bottom one says 2B medium. I know the glare is making it a little hard to see, but having a couple different weights tends to be good. I mostly prefer just having softer ones more than anything else, because that tends to work best. And those are good for really tight details in your charcoal drawings. And then finally, I would recommend at least one white charcoal pencil. So again, looks the same as a pencil, but it has white in the tip there instead of black charcoal. And this can be really good for cleaning up tight details as well. You don't want to use a ton of it, especially if you have like off-white colored paper. It'll look really odd. but it's nice for cleaning things up and doing small little things here and there. So next up, we have assorted ink pens on our list. Now, you probably already have a lot of pens at home kind of scattered around, and whatever you have is probably going to work. You can also find pens that have more of these kind of like brush tips to them, and those can be nice too for different types of drawings. We're not going to use them nearly as much as our other more traditional drawing stuff, but just having a few options. So like Sharpie makes some nice pens you can work with. Having a more kind of standard drawing pen would be good. And even a couple different kind of thick markers can be nice too. I wouldn't recommend going out and spending a ton on like Copic markers or any of those really expensive sets unless you're really thinking you're going to try that out a lot. But this semester we're pretty much just working black and white, and we're leaning a little more heavily towards graphite and charcoal than pen. So you shouldn't go out and do a ton with that. Now, the next type of supply we need to talk about are erasers. And you'll find that there's different types of erasers. They all do very different things. And a lot of times the eraser tends to be a tool that you do a lot more of your drawing with in the end. So our first one we have on the list is called a kneaded eraser. So you can see that, here you go. You can see it says kneaded rubber there in the middle. So a lot of times they come in these kind of little square shapes, but once you open them up, you'll find that they're very soft, and they're more like silly putty or something like that. You can kind of pull them apart and work with them. They mold a lot. You can shape them a little bit, and they're good tools for doing a lot of blending and kind of smearing sections of your charcoal in different areas and doing some light erasing. So you'll definitely want one of these. The next type is a hard plastic eraser. So this is a different brand than on your list, but basically it's those white, hard, rectangular ones. Those are ideal. Those help you get some nice, sharp erasing done. You can, sometimes you can have luck with some of the like pink ones as well. All mine are filthy at this point, but you get the point. And they also make, more recently I've started using these black erasers, which are pretty good for erasing charcoal as well. But having a variety, you'll see that they all react slightly differently to different types of drawings. So it can be good to have a variety on hand so you're ready for whatever the circumstance calls for. And then finally, I also recommend a retractable stick eraser. So like this one, I've had this one so long all the stuff's worn off of it. But basically, it's kind of like a mechanical pencil, except you squeeze out an eraser, and it's got this nice fine tip to it. So you can touch up these really fine details a lot more easily. You can also find them in even smaller sizes. I know if you go through Amazon or some of those places, you can find these really tiny ones. And if you want to get really intense with it, you can find these motorized. So this one's battery powered. So that helps for finer details that you need a lot more pressure on. You certainly don't need that this semester. But I do a lot more drawing than you probably do. So I like to kind of play around with the other tools that I can find out there. Now, so variety of erasers. If you're not sure if you have the right ones, as with anything on this list, if you got something and you're not sure it's going to work, send me a picture or just send me an email asking if it's going to work, and I'll let you know. It shouldn't be too hard to tell. Now, with our drawings, we want to have a way of protecting these things. So what I recommend is an odorless fixative spray. Now I've got two kinds here, and these are both workable fixative. Let's see here. This one I think is much older. But one of the important things is you want odorless because obviously you're going to have a lot of fumes off of these. You're going to want to always spray these outside, never do it in your house because it'll linger forever and it'll give you a headache. But what happens with charcoal and with graphite even, it can smear really easily. It can get really smudged badly. So using fixatives helps kind of seal that layer down and keep it from getting damaged quite as easily. Now you can find, like, as I said, like these are both workable, which means you can spray it and then keep drawing on top of it. But it's good to also have a final fixative. And that's something that you spray at the very end, and that just seals it all in nicely. It's kind of like adding varnish to a painting because sometimes it makes those darker tones feel a little bit more rich and clean. Now, the next item we have on our list is painter's tape. So blue tape, and you can get that in a variety of sizes. I recommend like a 1/4 inch or so. So something like this is pretty good. You can get something this heavy if you need it, and you can go across the board. But these are good for kind of blocking in sections, and we'll use those in different times. So just one roll is probably going to go very far for you. And then finally, in terms of our main required materials, I mentioned having a drawing board, which is a hard surface to attach your drawings to while you work on them. Because one thing you'll notice, like if you're trying to draw on this, you can see how kind of flimsy it is. And so even if you're just doing it in your lap, it'll kind of move and flex and do different stuff. So it's good to have some type of hard drawing board to work with. Now you can buy them, and they're pretty cheap, like 15 bucks for a lot of them, I think. But you could also go, if you want to go even cheaper, if you have spare wood lying around, or if you don't mind going to Home Depot, you can get a sheet of masonite and get that cut down. You want to make sure it's large enough to fit an 18 by 24 sheet. But that's what I do, honestly. Since I work on multiple drawings at once, I get kind of a hard board, and then I just use these binder clips to kind of attach them to the board. And that way, when I'm working on it, I've got something that's going to keep it from flexing and moving, and it's going to hold still. And it also helps me, I can set it on the easel and draw, and then take it down and set it aside and grab another one that I have if I want to take a break. So having that nice variety available is going to be ideal for you. Now, a couple other materials that aren't on your list but are things I recommend. One of them is called ebony graphite drawing pencils. Let's see here. See, you can see ebony right there. It's really just a much smoother drawing material. So, they sharpen up like a normal pencil. But I think they're good to have. I tend to do most of my graphite drawing. I use ebonies for a lot of it because they have a lot more versatility to them. But it's also good to understand the different types of drawing pencils. So that's why I want you to have all the other weights. One other thing you could get, but you don't need necessarily, is what's called newsprint. And this also comes in these large sheets, but you'll notice like newsprint is a much kind of softer, lighter weight paper. So it's good for if you're doing a ton of like really fast sketches and gestures. It's good to use newsprint because you can burn through a ton of that paper, and it's so cheap you don't feel the crunch as much versus that nicer drawing paper we use. It's a little more expensive comparatively. So if you're doing a lot more drawing in the future, especially a lot more figure drawings and stuff like that, newsprint is a good way to go. Couple more things that we didn't mention that you don't need but would be nice to have are what we call blending stumps, and they're basically like rolled paper that they roll into this nice tight little point, and these are good for what it sounds like, for blending sections, and you can normally get like a 3-pack or so for pretty cheap. So those are good to have. I recommend having rags on hand. You can see on my easel here, I've got shop rag that roll down there because you'll get very messy. And these are also good for kind of blending in large sections, certainly in earlier stages of the drawing. Chamois cloths are really good because they have a nice texture to them for doing that. So that can also be good. And then finally, two more things. One that should have been up there, pencil sharpener. You want to be able to sharpen those pencils because they will dull very, very quickly. And you'll find that like if you're doing a ton of stuff, and honestly, I just use the cheap little ones that I can get because you don't need to spend money for something that fancy, but you can get the mechanical ones if you want. But keeping your pencil sharp gives you a lot more variety in your line making, and you end up being a lot more precise in your drawings versus if you have a really fat, worn down pencil nub, you get these really thick lines you have less control over. Now then finally, a ruler. or some type of straight edge. That will be helpful in a lot of different applications, so I always recommend having a ruler. I think you don't want to lean too heavily on your ruler. Sometimes we get really kind of rigid with trying to get all our angles right with one, and it feels really unnatural in the final drawing. You can tell when someone used a ruler for part of it and didn't use it for other parts. So it's a good tool to have. Some people say don't use them because you turn it into a crutch, but I think it's still pretty handy. So those are all the main materials to look at. You should also consider like where you're going to draw. So I would recommend setting up like a corner in your room or somewhere like that where you can kind of keep working with them and not have to set down and turn your whole room apart every time you want to work on an assignment. Easels are great, but they can be expensive. Drawing tables are great, but a kitchen table can also work nicely. And we'll talk later in the semester about posture and things like that to consider if you do use something like an easel. So hopefully that kind of covers everything for you. If you have questions, please feel free to email me. And you should be able to reference this video in a couple different spots on the Canvas page, so you can check it again if you have more questions in the future. All right, thanks a lot.